All right, I'm just cautious of time. Tom, you good to go?
I am. I can. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Let's do it. Hello, everyone. Yes, thanks very much, Derek. That was awesome. Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm going to just cover off quickly what looks like the first question will be, why does it look like you're standing on garage? Because I'm standing in my garage. Due to times of bedtimes and where the study is and all that sort of stuff, it was just easier. So that's where I am. That's the reason for the backdrop. The only other reason for mentioning it is because I'm doing all this on a laptop. So I'm going to be doing a couple of transitions and demos and stuff. So I'm just going to say, bear with me if it's not quite as slick as you might normally expect. But we'll get through it somehow. All right, so going to be talking about Microsoft Teams, going to talk about applications. Probably going to dance about a bit because it's 7 degrees outside and I'm pretty sure it's 7 degrees in this garage. So we've talked already. The other speakers tonight have also mentioned applications in Microsoft Teams. Teams has come up on both those talks, and it's been really interesting to see what's happening with Teams at the moment. It's becoming the hub for work, and it's that central place where, I was going to say users, but let's say people interact with Microsoft 365, and that is entirely by design. It is not a happy accident on Microsoft's part. This is a journey that they are on. It is a very deliberate journey to bring data to people where they are collaborating and communicating. That whole story about how Microsoft got to where they are now is an entitled by itself, which is kind of interesting. How they all got it wrong and now I think are getting it right. But how does it actually affect us today and the things that we're going to be talking about today? Well, in order for that strategy that Microsoft have of bringing everything into Teams and making Teams the hub, in order for that to succeed, Microsoft have to provide tools for developers and more so non-developers to bring that other information into Teams. Even Microsoft will acknowledge that all of the data and the information and the process flows that users need, not all of that always lives in the Microsoft 365 stack of the top 5 apps that already are integrated in Microsoft Teams, right? So they have to provide developers good tools to let that happen. If you're feeling more cynical, the other way of looking at that is the more apps you have in Teams, the more engagement you have in Teams, the more people you have using Teams, and apps keep Teams sticky. And so there's been a real explosion in the past few years in capability for what people can do, what developers can do on Teams. And that could be quite confusing if you're coming into this cold. It can be quite confusing if you're not a developer. It can be quite off-putting. And you might kind of come away thinking this isn't, there's this whole landscape of developing apps on Teams and it's just for developers. I'm going to try and tell you that is not at all true. I'm going to go through the big 3 development areas where you kind of do things that interact with Teams and show you things that developers can do, show you things that IT pros can do, non-developers, and also trying to blur this line a bit because there is a big kind of divide between developers and non-developers, and I think it's a bit misplaced because lots of people think they're not developers, and then I ask them if they do PowerShell. Oh yeah, of course I do PowerShell. Well, you are a developer then. You just don't think you are. So if there's lots and lots of entry points basically. And then in the end, I'm going to quickly cover app templates as well because I think they're awesome and they're a really good way of jump starting. And I'm going to keep it fairly crisp as well so that we can sort of finish sort of not too late as well. So 3 big areas: Microsoft Graph APIs, the Teams UI and experience, and bots. And I'm going to cover each of those and then talk about app templates. So let's start right at the beginning. So this is primarily kind of aimed more at developers, but it's really, I think, useful for like non-developers who don't even plan to do any development to listen in and just understand the landscape, because more and more this stuff is becoming democratized. But if you don't understand the why and the building blocks and all the rest of it, it makes less sense. So Microsoft Graph, obviously big repository of different APIs, and many of those APIs interact with Microsoft Teams. Mostly it's lifecycle management stuff. So creating a team, updating a team, adding things, removing things from teams, deleting teams at the end, installing apps, archiving it, all that sort of stuff. It's all based around the Azure AD application model. So that's exactly the same as everything else in kind of Microsoft 365 now and all of Azure. This idea of an application that has permissions and secrets, has admin oversight and control. It's exactly the same model. There's two different ways of calling Microsoft, well, there's two different ways of calling Graph APIs when it comes to permissions. There's user delegated permissions and there's application permissions. User delegated permissions operate in the scope of the user whose permission you are acting on behalf of. So normally you know you're doing that, or if you're kind of interacting with an application that does that, it's the sort that makes you log in. So it pops up a login box, asks you to accept and authorize whatever permissions, and then it will do things, and it's doing them on your behalf. So they show up in the audit log as coming from you. Separately to that, application permissions, they don't require a user to be present. So they are much better for runs every night in the background sort of tasks. You know, polls on the hour, sort of tidies up some things. Much wider in scope in a way, like they're not tied by the same permission set that a user delegated permission is. So user delegated permissions can only do the same things that users can, whereas an application permission kind of has much wider rights. All of those permissions are all managed in Azure, and there's a couple of gotchas because not all of the API calls have parity between what you can do with user delegated permissions and what you can do with application permissions. So it's worth just understanding the difference between them, first of all, which one is right for you, and then seeing what's available. The good news is the docs for Graph are really, really good. So all of the calls that you go and look at in Graph, it'll tell you exactly what permissions you need. You know, if you want to go and create a team, you need a very specific permission set called, you know, teams.create.all or something. And you can do that as a user, or you can do it as an application. In fact, right now you can only do it as a user. Something else that's worth knowing is something very specific to Microsoft Teams called resource-specific consent. This is the idea that let's say adding and removing users from Teams is something that people like to want to automate. And that permission is quite a powerful permission. So if you want to have an application that occasionally adds some users to one team that you have, normally you'd have to go and grant that application permission to modify users across your entire tenant. And for a lot of IT admins, the answer to that is no. What resource-specific consent does is allow the owners of a specific team to authorize that application to perform those actions just on the bounds of that team. So that kind of unlocks the puzzle, because IT admins are then happy because the scope is quite low. Team owners are happy because their app gets to do what they want to do, and developers are happy because they've got the permission to do what they want to do. So that's worth remembering if you get kind of stuck in that place. Resource-specific consent, if it's a Teams workload, might be able to get you out of it. And then if you've never used it before, go and have a look at Graph Explorer. If you want to start looking at these transactional APIs, Graph Explorer is a great place to start. They're just API calls, so you can do them in PowerShell, you can do them in regular code. If you want to write regular code, yep, they're just API calls. There's a million low-code solutions as well, like Power Automate and some of the other ones as well, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But Graph Explorer is a really good way of just understanding what's possible and what the impact is, lets you try out these API calls. A couple of things to be aware of. There's a 1.0 branch and there's a beta branch. They're quite different. 1.0 is GA, beta is not. Beta changes quite quickly, 1.0 changes quite slowly. There are less things in 1.0 than there are in beta. Be aware of things like throttling. If you do anything with an application at scale, you are going to get throttled. It is a bit of a pain and it will kind of come back and bite you. It's just Graph protecting itself. And there's the trouble with throttling in a way. The problem is that it's quite hard to know why you're being throttled when you get throttled, because there are published limits and there are some unpublished limits. There are limits at the graph level, there are limits at each service level. So there's an overall big graph throttling limit, and then individual to each service, so Teams, SharePoint, OneNote, OneDrive, whatever, has its own service level limits. You'll get a nice 429 response. Sometimes if you're lucky, you'll get a retry after header, but not always. It completely depends on the service. The kind of what you should do about it you need to just implement exponential backoff is probably the best thing to do. You can try and rely on the retry after headers, but quite a lot of the time they're not there. Teams does a really good job of publishing rate limits for its use, actually, which is nice. And there's a kind of thing at the bottom which comes straight from the documentation that you shouldn't really use it to poll. There are better ways. I'm going to talk about those now, actually. There are better ways of doing things than just polling all the time to see if data's changed. Kind of little known thing you can do in Graph, you can actually batch calls together. It's a bit more efficient. So you can batch up to 20 together in one go. It works better for your throttling. You don't get throttled so much if you do that. It's better for you. You're not making quite so many calls, and you get the results returned in a single batch response as well. And you can mix and match the calls that you make across different kind of places, different workloads. If you do need to get loads and loads of data out of Graph, calling all those transactional APIs is probably not the best answer. Go and have a look at the bulk data sets, the data connect data sets. They are directly, they're kind of, you set them up and then the data drops directly into Azure Data Factory. So they're really good for getting large amounts of data very quickly. The bad thing about them is that they don't have universal support across all of Graph yet. So it's mostly users and mail at the moment, to be honest. It's not Microsoft Teams yet, but a lot of solutions that involve Microsoft Teams also involve users and sometimes file and mail. So I've kind of mentioned them here in case that kind of comes up and you think, oh yeah, Tom said that, you're looking at data sets and Data Connect, because I've decided I need to download all of the mail in my organization. Relatively breaking news, there are also new export APIs for Microsoft Teams, so if that's interesting, and import APIs as well, actually. So you can now import and export messages in bulk as well. And then there are some Delta queries. So Delta queries allow you to, a bit like the old DirSync, so if you are trying to find changes, you can get a token and then pick up changes since the last token. Okay, this is the other thing you can do with Microsoft Graph, again, not so well known, are change notifications. So this is better than polling every day to see if something changes. You can tell Graph to tell you when something changes. So it's a webhook mechanism, basically. You set up a subscription for a particular workload, like Teams messages or new channels or like messages in a channel or whatever else it is, and tell Graph to call you back on an endpoint. And when anything happens, Graph will call your API with the information of whatever is changed. Much nicer to write code for as a developer. Means you're not polling all the time, and that also means you can use something like Azure Functions or any other serverless architecture to really scale it out. And it's really, really low cost as well, which is nice. Really new, like last week, I think, lifecycle notifications. So that's just an additional kind of subscription you can make that means Graph will tell you when your subscription is broken, and so you're not left thinking things have just gone really quiet when actually your subscription was broken because your user was, had their account locked or something like that. Really easy to set up. You just make a post call to the subscription endpoint. You give it the URL that you want Graph to call you back on. You tell it what you want, what you care about, in this case, Teams messages. You give an expiration date and some secret stuff, all really well documented as well, the Microsoft Graph docs. You do that, and then there's a bit of like handshaking where Graph goes to that endpoint and calls it, and then you have to reply in a certain way so that Graph knows you didn't just make it up, and then you're off. Subscriptions depend on the workload. Some are really small, some are really long, but you get told what it is, and you can also renew your subscription before it expires with a patch command, so you can make them last forever as long as you stay responsive. Okay, bit of a whirlwind tour, but there we go. So other big pillar, Teams UI and experience, and this is what people think of when they think of developing for Teams. They think of all the UI and the Chrome and all that kind of stuff. So that this is kind of grown, and actually there's more things that are on this list now, but this is the kind of experience users have of applications and data coming into Teams. Tabs is the big one. Tabs is the one kind of everyone thinks about. It's also really easy to implement because it's just a web page. Messaging extensions, I think, are really underrated. I'm going to show you one in a minute, in case, just to make sure everybody sees them, because I think they're underused and should be used more. and they come in a couple of different variants as well. Task modules are a way of, you hardly ever see, is actually popping up almost like dialog boxes, center of the screen, grab the attention of the user. You can now embed some of these into meeting experiences as well, which is new, kind of announced at Ignite. You can, for the best experience, really, you combine them together so they're not just one thing. You have an application which combines all of these things together, and you can use them with or without bots as well for a kind of super rich experience, because sometimes a bot experience is the right thing, but sometimes having a tab open a web page for better, more visual information is much better than just trying to deliver it all through a bot. Yes, so let me show you two things real quick. So I'm going to show you message extensions just to make sure you've seen them. So this is Teams, and messaging extensions, you see them down here in this bar at the bottom where you go for your emojis and your GIFs. You can write an application to put your own stuff in here. Why would you want to do that? Let's use a sort of canonical example of a product catalog. So I work at this organization, all our products are in a product catalog. New people into the company take a long time to kind of get skilled up because everybody is talking in these product codes because they all understand the product codes, but it's a language. It's the language of the company, and it takes a long time to learn that language. And as a new starter, people are constantly going back to the product catalog to try and work out what everyone's talking about. This is a great place where a messaging extension could come in, because if I want to start a conversation about a particular product, I can go to my messaging extension here, and this is tied to my fictitious product catalog. So I can just search for a product code, and it's going to go and look in my fictitious, dynamically built, so it takes a few minutes, catalog, and choose that whatever I care, whichever one matches the product code. So this one, and then it'll make a nice card and put it into the conversation. So I'm ready to start a conversation now about this particular product. It's also nicely kind of pulled the link for the CMS. It's pulled some stock information. This is a much nicer way to start a conversation than just putting in product 2245. Let's talk about that, right? Because everybody now understands exactly what that product is, and everybody's got that kind of nice contextual information. And that's really simple to do just by making some API calls out to your legacy database, your legacy third-party system, whatever else it is. By the way, this works really well on mobiles as well. So if you've got legacy third-party applications, this is a really nice way of kind of enabling them for the 21st century, enabling them for lockdown, because now they're accessible on desktop, on web, on mobile in a nice, secure way, in a kind of managed way as well. So this is a much nicer approach. Okay, if all of that sounds kind of interesting, and you think, well, I might want to start with that, but I don't really know where to start. I don't really know what I'm doing. There's a new toolkit that is Microsoft provided. This kind of there's a few of these is the problem. So there's a community provided set of toolkits which are Yeoman generators. But if you don't know what Yeoman is, don't worry about it. Just know that they exist, and you might hear people talking about them. But if you like Yeoman, go and look at those. Microsoft have also come up with their own set of generators based around Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. If you want to know what I think probably the Visual Studio Code ones are probably a nicer place to start if you've never done any of this before, just because the support is probably slightly better. So what does that look like? You get Visual Studio Code, which is free. You go and install the Microsoft Teams toolkit, again, which is free. You get a nice Microsoft Teams logo on the side, and then you can click and say, log in, of course. Let's just log in. Okay, lovely. And say, I want to create a new Teams app. Okay, I want to create a Teams app with a tab and or a bot and or messaging extension. So I'm literally going to tick some boxes and just kind of move through. I can set up what my application, what I want it to look like. How do I want to configure my tab? Do I want it just in personal scope? Do I want it as a group or Teams channel tab? I'm just going to make a personal one. I'm going to click finish. I'm going to decide where to put it. Let's put it on here. And it's going to make some scaffolding. Now, the nice thing about this is different from a sample or a demo, because it's nothing you don't need and everything you do. So it is the minimally smallest kind of functionally complete application you could build. If you look down here, there's very, very little in here, apart from, I can't really see because the light's in the way. There's very little in here that you don't need. Let me just try and find there's like one line, here you go, that just says, congratulations, this is the tab you made. I could deploy this. It nicely comes with everything. It's done all the scaffolding for all the rubbishy stuff that you have to do to make a Teams application that can be a bit confusing if you've never done it before. And if you come back over to here, it's got a bunch of nice prerequisites for the things you have to do next, how to get it to run. Like, you could follow these if you've never done it before, and you'd get working with a Teams application that just does nothing, but it's an excellent starting point for then layering on the business process, business logic. You haven't got to spend a week figuring out how to actually build a Teams application from scratch, how to build a Teams tab from scratch. It's a really good place to start. So if you're looking to get started building any of that Teams UI stuff, I'd say go check out the Teams toolkit, because I think they're really good. When you do come to build your application, it is worth thinking a little bit about what you're building, why you're building, and who you're building it for. Teams is supposed to be about collaboration, and so your app kind of should make the most of that, make the best of that. It's very easy to kind of think that what you want to do is port over the app that, you know, sales or marketing currently have and they currently use in the legacy system, because that's how it's always been and it's 20 years old and that's how they want it to work. I would say go and ask people, go and talk to people. It's been said earlier, users have a ridiculous amount of choice for the applications they use every day. And so if you want them to use yours, just telling them to do so probably won't cut it anymore. So if you want people to use your app, it's got to be good. If you want it to be good, you've got to talk to them about what they want. Don't try and boil the ocean, do one thing well. Just talk to them, design, sit down on the whiteboard with them. Think about the collaboration as well. So think about how you can make the best use of Teams, by enabling people to make it very easy to share the information that you're exposing within conversations and with channels. So things like the messaging extension is a great example of that. Posting information to channels to enable better visibility. All these kind of things that help make your application kind of a better Teams application, and don't drive users into a place they can't, in like a dead end that they can't get out of. Okay, let's also talk about bots. So bots they're just really part of the Teams UI, but they're the thing that everybody wants to build. And certainly within Microsoft, they are slightly bigger than Microsoft Teams as a kind of construct. In a way, though, they are just another UI. So if you think about a conversation with a bot, you need to give it the same design care and design thought that you would any other Teams construct, because in fact it's even harder, because your UI is just text for the most part. Yes, you can set cards, coming to that in a minute, and so you can set like images and rich, but it's essentially a two-way conversation, and that is the UI that your application has with the user. So you do need to think quite carefully about it. Everybody wants to build a bot at the moment. Luckily, it's actually, oh, there's a spelling mistake in my title. It's actually nice and easy. And actually the reason totally makes sense in the context of bringing data and information into where users are having those conversations. So we know users are already in Microsoft Teams collaborating, communicating with each other. If they can reach out to bots, which surface alongside users in the chats and channels, and they're mentionable in the same way that users are, they can reach to those bots to retrieve information, or like kick off process flows, and that could be something within Microsoft 365. It could be something somewhere completely different. Then it's going to keep them in the moment. It's going to keep them more engaged and more kind of productive, essentially, and happier. And if you can do all of that within Teams, then everybody's happy. Okay, so I said that bots in Microsoft Teams were slightly bigger than Teams itself. They're actually an entire service that is nothing to do with Microsoft Teams, called Azure Bot Service. This is kind of a thing that's been built up over the past few years. Incorporates a thing called Bot Frameworks. If you've heard that, that's what it is. And the general basic idea for this is that if you want to build a bot, then you build it on the bot framework. And when you've built it on the bot framework, you can then enable it for different channels, meaning that you don't have to understand how all these different channels then kind of communicate with each other and talk to each other, how they interact with each other, how they kind of start and stop and have all their weird, like, you know, mannerisms and all the rest of it. You just write it once against a common framework, and then you kind of literally just tick box to kind of enable it. There's a number of different channels that are supported, including ones like Alexa and Google Home, and it is that simple. So I had a bot I'd written for Microsoft Teams to surface my presence in Teams. So it was a bot that you could talk to, and it would tell whoever was asking it what my presence was. The day that the bot framework team enabled it for Amazon Alexa, I went and clicked the button to say I want this bot to work on Alexa. I kind of had to fill out the stuff on the Alexa developer side, traded some API keys, and then suddenly that same bot that I'd written for Teams now works if I go up to my Alexa devices and talk to it. I didn't have to change any of the code I wrote, it just worked exactly the same. And that's kind of the power of the bot framework, really, is that it enables your bot to show up in lots of different places, of which Teams is one of them, but also Skype for Business, email, Slack, you can embed it in a web page, all these other things. So building on the bot framework, like I say, it's been around for quite a long time. I always talk about building a weather bot as like a good example of how to build a bot, because everybody understands what a weather bot should do, right? It should give you the weather, but also it's a great example because really what you're doing when you're kind of building a weather bot, and you know, when you're running a weather bot, is you're calling an API. You're gathering some information from a user, and then you're making an API call, and you're then rendering the results. So that is a really common thing. Everybody has a use case for in every organization. So understanding how to build a weather bot means that you can take that and then just kind of evolve it into whatever it is your particular use case is. So back in 2017, I used to do a session where I would build a weather bot in a session. It was a 60-minute session. Pretty much the whole thing was me writing code, because it took 60 minutes to write a weather bot using bot framework. It was probably pretty boring to watch because it's like it was so much code I had to write. I could barely kind of do the talking as well. It was terrifying for me to do as well because there wasn't any wiggle room. You can see from the photo, I had to take my own keyboard to conferences because there was that much typing. So that was 2017. 2018, that same weather bot, exactly the same weather bot, only took 30 minutes to build. The big thing that changed is that bot framework moved into what's called the Azure Bot Service. I think that's the name of it, mind blank. The ability to provision the bits that bot framework needs as a service in Azure. And that immediately took away a whole load of the heavy lifting. It came with some excellent templates. So if you go to Azure now and create a new web app bot, you can choose from templates to get a fully functioning bot that, like, a really good one is like the Echo bot. So literally anything you send it, it sends back as the text. So you say hello, it says hello. You can then download the code for that. And again, you've then got a minimally kind of working template to go and scaffolded template to go and build off. And it's done all the configuration for you. So that made things so much easier, but it was still 30 minutes and it was still coding. And people go out to the end and said, you don't need to, like, you started this saying you didn't need to be a developer, but then you dropped straight into code. What's going on? And I tried so hard to say, look, the code is really not hard. Look how not hard it is. Download the template and all you're doing is fiddling with bits, but it was still code. And like, yeah, I get it. Like it's a, people don't want to write code. Like, you know, not everybody wants to be a developer, right? So anyway, fast forward to 2010. There is actually now a UI for bot framework. So there is a UI that enables you to write bot framework code. So this, it looks a bit like Power Automate, and in some ways it kind of is. It allows you to drag and drop these composable parts to build a working bot. You can test it with the emulator. You can then what it's actually doing is writing real bot framework code. So it's not a complete black box abstraction. You can drop into that code to look at it whenever you want. So that's really nice. So you can use it as training as well. If you want to know how to do something, then you can always like build it up in the composer and then actually go and look at the actual code later. It is an excellent way of designing bots with users because users can understand these flows. It's much easier to see than it is a whole wall of code. If you've got a non-technical user, you can walk them through a flow diagram like this, and they can really understand what the bot is doing. So this is an excellent, like everybody should go check this out if you want to go and build a bot. Go and find the bot framework composer. And let me just show you what it would look like to build a weather bot using the bot framework composer. Okay, so this is bot framework composer, and I've created a section in here called weather. This is a fairly boring and basic bot. What I should have done is link together all the magical Lewis language understanding stuff, because bot framework composer can handle all of that, makes it nice and easy, but in the interest of time I didn't. So this is a dumb bot that really just gets triggered. This whole thing about the weather gets triggered by me typing weather as a trigger phrase. So that's not perfect, but if I was to build this out, I'd build in all the natural language processing stuff, because actually it's nice and easy to do in the composer. Anyway, not important now. Look at these boxes. So this is how you'd build up a weather bot, and you can see that kind of these all make sense, right? This is bot asks, and I can add more of these just by clicking add, adding these boxes. So things to ask questions, types of questions, creating conditions. I can do looping. What else can I do? I can call external resources like HTTP requests. I've got quite a lot of interesting things I can do. So to build a weather bot like this, I've just asked the user where they want the weather for. I'm just putting it into a variable. I'm sending an HTTP request. This is just a call to like a weather API. And then I'm doing some kind of fairly basic checking on the result that it's a 200, setting a property, and finally sending a response that's based on the response about the weather. I can either publish all of this up to Azure Bot Service from here, or I can test it locally in an emulator. So I'm going to do that now because it's a lot quicker. And that's going to open the emulator. It's going to jump me into a new conversation. Again, no kind of configuration needed. It used to be that you'd have to kind of tie these things together, have it running in one place and the rest of it. This now is a kind of really seamless integration. And so I've got this bot here that I wrote just by dragging these bits around, didn't actually write any code. So I need to do that thing to drop into the weather thing. Okay, it's going to ask me where I want the weather for, because that's the first box. Here we are. That's the first box to say, where do you want the weather for? Let's put in Southampton. I forgot to mention my geographical credentials for being here. I was born in Arundel and grew up in Chichester. So here we go. Right now in Southampton, it is apparently 6 degrees with clear sky. No idea if that's true or not, because I don't live there anymore. But it seems about right, because I do live in Norwich, and it's about that as well. So this works. It calls the API. It's an awful lot easier to build than it ever used to be using this bot framework composer. So this is definitely worth checking out if you're building anything with bots. If you're a developer or not, like you can go here, like start here, see how far you get. I think you'll be really surprised how much you can do without actually writing any code. The other thing that's worth mentioning at this point are Power Virtual Agents, also announced at the same Ignite. It wasn't 2020, it wasn't this Ignite, it was on before, wasn't it? Yep, so weirdly at Ignite 2019, yes, Microsoft announced 2 different UIs for building bots, not at all confusing. This one is slightly different. It's part of the Power Platform. It is licensed slightly differently, like you pay for this one a bit more upfront. Bot Framework you still pay for. But you only pay for the resources. Basically, it's free to use, but you pay for the bits that you put into Azure. This has a different licensing model. There's this one. There's also one that's tied to Project Oakdale, which makes it free to do basic tasks as well that I haven't mentioned on here. This is very much pitched as a no-code solution for building bots. So if you or someone you know is much more a kind of more on the businessy side, maybe on the process side, or an SME in a particular area, understands what they want to do, but don't want to doesn't necessarily want to learn how to code and code up a bot, this might be a good one. There's kind of superpower, if you like, for these virtual agents is their ability to execute flows in Power Automate. So if you have an organization that is really dependent on flows, they've already got loads and loads of flows going on to map different parts of their business, this could be a really nice way of automating those and executing on those. And you can publish these directly to teams. There is some, I didn't mention it here, there is some good overlap as well between both Power Virtual Agents and Bot Framework, because under the hood, they're mostly the same thing. So you can do some really nice things. So if you've got an IT team, let's say in your organization, that is kind of properly dev, they will probably use Bot Framework, and they might use the Composer as well, and then drop into real code to augment it out to maybe build something that's really specific to your business. Let's say an internal ticketing system or something, right? They will build that in Bot Framework. They can wrap that up, not necessarily as a bot, they can wrap it up as a skill. Okay, and a skill is like a composable part of a particular bot, and a bot can have many skills. However, business users can then take that skill, they can embed those skills inside Power Virtual Agent. So you can actually trigger a skill from within Power Virtual Agent. So now you can have business users building up in Power Virtual Agents, calling flows all over the place, and also integrating this complicated black box of IT support desk stuff built by the IT team. So that's really powerful as a way of building up some complicated solutions. Okay, I'm aware of time. I've kind of raced, but I know kind of everybody probably wants to have an evening as well. I do want to spend a second talking about app templates though, because I think they're amazing. So they were kind of briefly mentioned in one of the other talks as well. They're fully working apps that are built for Microsoft Teams. They are written by Microsoft and or the community. You deploy them directly into your Azure. You can manage them from there. They come with detailed deployment guides. They come with architecture documents, solution and costing. They're completely open source and they're completely free. So there is literally no reason not to use them. All the code for them is on GitHub. And today there's a whole bunch of them. They cover a variety of common business scenarios, such as the kind of icebreaker bot I think we've seen, company communicator as well. There's a bunch of other expert finder ones as well. I've categorized a list, the links at the bottom, because like it was kind of confusing to see what they were and what they were all for. So I've categorized them into different kind of buckets for the business. And they're adding new ones all the time, which is really interesting. Let's just look at one in detail. So there's one of them called list search. So if you've got a bunch of information in a SharePoint list, you can expose that using messaging extensions. So using the thing I've already shown you, giving you a nice place in Teams to kind of easily search that list that's in SharePoint. So that's kind of, that might just solve a problem for somebody somewhere, right? So it's really easy to set up. Like I say, you just follow the instructions. So here's what they look like when you go. Yes, it's in GitHub, and that scares some people, but don't worry about it. Look down to the bottom. You've got a nice bit of text that tells you what it is, and then you've got these 3 links for documentation, deployment guide, and architecture. All of the apps in app templates come with these 3 things as a minimum. Documentation is really decent. It tells you exactly what it is, why you have it, you know, what the pros and what the cons are. The deployment guide you can follow. If you can follow instructions, you can follow the deployment guide. That doesn't assume any particular knowledge. It walks you through what you need to do in Azure. It walks you through what you need to set up. Under the hood, they're using a lot of ARM templates. So if you know what they are, that's good. If you don't worry about it. It just means you haven't got to like painstakingly create a million things in Azure. And then they all come with a nice solution overview as well. So if you need to go and get it signed off from someone, and they want to understand what it is, or you just want to understand what it is and how it all hangs together, because you can always take these and use them as like how to learn how to build bots the Microsoft approved way, because they've got the solution overview here and all the codes in GitHub as well. So I think they're really, really cool. And so I think everybody should check them out. Okay, so I'm going to take a break in a second, but wrapping it all together, there's no reason not to start building applications on Microsoft Teams. I don't want people to kind of come away thinking you have to be like a real developer to do it. There's lots of zero dev solutions. I haven't mentioned Q&A Maker. I haven't even really mentioned Power Automate. Those are well covered by other people as well. really, like, there's no reason for people not to be building Teams apps. It's kind of a really interesting place to be right now. It's where users are. So there's lots and lots of tools out there to kind of help and make these experiences that bring data to people wherever they're already collaborating, wherever they already are. So give it a go today. I think you might be surprised and excited to see what happens. Thanks very much for listening to me. My name is Tom Morgan. Twitter link's on the bottom. You can find all the other stuff by following there and starting there. Thanks very much for listening. And if there's any time, we can do some questions. If not, have a great evening.
Cheers, thanks for that, Tom. That was really good. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat. I know Jan probably was loving some of that development stuff. Jan and I work quite closely.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I've actually done a lot of the stuff around the Teams subscriptions, actually pulling Teams calls out. Doing Teams call routing reports.
That is really interesting. That's the kind of new, it's in beta at the moment. That is like, there's a whole wealth of really interesting information there, actually.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fab. It does produce an awful lot of information, though.
Yes, and quite quickly. Yes.
Yes.
It's, yes.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Derek. I think Kevin dropped off earlier. He had some kids issues. Hopefully his own kids. Yeah, it's been great. Hopefully we can do something in person next year. Maybe we'll book out a room at a venue and sit in the corner of the room each and put a face mask on. But yeah, no, it's really good. Thank you very much.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you.
Cool. Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Great. Yeah, and it's nice to. There's quite a few names on the attendee list as well. That's quite new. There's obviously a few that I know of. But yeah, hopefully for the next one, in early January, we can get a few more people, a few more faces. That'd be really good. Fab. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all. I will. I'll finish up there unless anyone's got any questions. All nice and quiet. Excellent. All right, guys. I'll leave you all to your evening, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, Aaron.